The Senate will come to order. Senator Murphy.
Good morning, Mr. President. I impose a call of the Senate.
The Senate is now under call.
I think AG told me one of the teachers they're going to do one outside.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, yeah, they normally do it all in the retirement. I mean, I could have done one of those units too. That's what I was thinking.
I only found out a couple weeks ago, so I'm saying, Little Magic,
Is it for where?
Little Magic.
Oh, really?
Near stores where you find stuff.
Okay, okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Chatting with him outside the chamber earlier this week. He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's cool. And I mean, he's like, what? Yeah, I think they're all like from Bloomfield.
Okay, okay, interesting. He's a nice guy.
Somebody mentioned something about the widows in a committee early on the session.
Oh,
Not early on, but it was like right around deadline time.
sure, sure.
Let's see what we have.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's right.
a warm state.
Yeah, right, yeah. Right, right.
What's going on with everyone?
The funny part of that. Connection to the East
Okay.
Coast. So I said, I need to start working and doing what I could.
Yeah.
I need to ask him. And so finally they like,
Yeah. Yeah,
it's like,
that
oh
was.
my God, this is small.
It is, yeah.
I don't need anybody.
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't know the history of the state. Most people came from the East Coast and from so yeah. But that's yeah, it would have been a big loss for Hartford. Hartford and Springfield, Mass. They were two cities that really, yeah, just yeah.
Industrial city.
Yeah, exactly.
They did like insurance.
Right.
Harvard was
Hartford,
really
right.
good.
Exactly. so, and the other goes, yeah, let's go see me. You know, we're thinking, well, this is Harlem. Yeah, this is cool.
The train ride.
Right, yeah. So we just, so we just, that's what we did. It was great though, but I remember we did a concert. We did like half a dozen last spring. And finally, and we would say, oh, Dad, I'm going to be over at God's. We're going to be studying tonight. It'll be late. And, don't wait up. And so it was good to have it. We take the last train Grand Central, which was like the 1-3 trains we did at 3:30. And we're going up the stairs, picking up stairs. My dad goes, Ford, is that you? I said, yeah, Dad, it's okay. I'll just go back to sleep. I said, oh, how was studying? Oh, really good. He goes, Don's mom called over here looking for Donald, and she said that you guys were studying over here. And I just like busted, and then it was like that says, don't do it again, whatever you were doing. Busted. But we were good students, and that's the thing. We were good students. Too close, and it just took too big a temptation. Because I love military stuff. All the time. Missions was always one of my favorite things. That's sort of always just too big a temptation. And usually it was like
3. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and that the Sergeant at Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, if you be so kind as to stand. In our tradition, as you know, in the Senate, we always start with prayer. That is usually followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And today's chaplain is our own Reverend Dr. Dwayne Davis from the Plymouth Congregational Church in Minneapolis. And as a gentle reminder, following the prayer, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Gracious One, Spirit of peace and justice, source of hope, light, and goodness, we are deeply grateful for the blessings you have bestowed upon the work of these servants during this season. Your enduring wisdom has guided their minds and decisions, inspiring them to discern together how best to serve the people of the state of Minnesota. And now we humbly ask for your continued providential care in the work before us, instilling a sense of purpose and wonder in this call to public service. Let us repay our debt of responsibility, not with a pursuit of self-interest or political advantage, but with generous service to the needs, concerns, and interests of the people. Let us not shrink from the challenge of pursuing the common good, nor fail to be constructive healers of the partisan and political breach that threatens our bonds of civic unity. Great One, strengthen us to bridge our differences and pursue our agendas with civility, integrity, and a generous, compassionate spirit. May we remember not the frustrations and the irritations of political competition, but the good work we did to improve the lives of the many. In your many names we pray. Amen.
Thank you, members. The secretary will take the roll.
Abler, Anderson, Barr, Bolden, Carlson, Champion, Coleman, Swadzinski, Dames, Dibble, Dornick, Draheim, Drazkowski, Duckworth, Dietzick, Eichhorn, Farnsworth, Fateh, Friends, Green, Grunhagen, Gustafson, Hochschild, Herr, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Jasinski, Johnson, Klein, Coran, Kroon, Kunish, Kupek, Lang, Latz, Liskey, Limmer, Lucero, Mann, Marty, Matthews, May-Quaid, McEwen, Miller, Mitchell, Mohammed, Morrison, Murphy, Nelson, Umuverbaten, Pappas, Pa, Port, Pratt, Putnam, Rarick, Rasmussen, Rest, Seeberger, Utke, Weber, Wiesenberg, Westland, Westrom, Wickland, Zhang.
Members, a quorum is present. The following members intend to vote from a remote location under Rule 40.7: Barr, Dietzick, and Howell. And I also, hold it, let me just double check something just to make sure. I'm sorry, her, not Howell, her. Let me check something on another member. And Morrison. I knew there was someone else and it wasn't on the list. I just wanted to make sure that I announced that. Members, you can follow along with me. I am looking at today's agenda, which is Saturday, May 18th. We will begin with the second order of business, executive and official communications. The following communications were received. Please make note as no action is required. Members, we will proceed to the third order of business, messages from the House. The Secretary will read the message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the following change in the membership of the Conference Committee on Senate File number 4699. Delete the name of Pinto and add the name of Ryer. Senate File number 4699, a bill for an act relating to state government modifying provisions governing health care. Signed, Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Members, no action is required. Members, we will now proceed to the eighth order of business, introduction and first reading of Senate bills. The bills listed on today's introduction calendar. The bills listed on the introduction calendar is given its first reading and referred as indicated. Members, we will now proceed to the eighth order of business, motions and resolutions. We will adopt the author's motion as one motion. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, Senate Resolutions 104 and 105 will be referred to the Committee on Rules and Administration. And again, no action is required. Remaining under motions and resolutions, Senator Murphy to designate special orders.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Rule 26, I designate the following bills be made special orders for immediate consideration. Members, the list is on your desk.
That is correct, members. The special orders list is on your desk, and we'll begin with House File 4738. Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the amendment made to House File 4738 by the Committee on Rules and Administration and the report adopted May 13th, 2024, pursuant to Rule 45, be stricken.
Senator Seeberger moved that the amendment made to House File 4738 by the Committee on Rules and Administration in the report adopted May 13, 2024, pursuant to Rule 45, be stricken. To that motion, Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. House File 4738 is our EMS bill. It's the work that we've done during interim and in the years preceding this session to address the problems facing our EMS systems in the state of Minnesota.
And Senator Seeberger, just so I give you clarity, you can do that, but we want to just make sure what are the differences between the Senate bill and the House bill that's what we need at this time. Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. The House file incorporates various amendments that were negotiated between the time the bill was heard in the Senate and the time that it was heard in the House. This includes amendments to the composition of the Advisory Council for the Emergency Services Advisory Council, and a few other amendments that were necessary to ensure that the governing structure created by this new bill works effectively. And that is the essential substance of the changes between the two bills.
Any other discussion on the differences in the motion that has been put forth by Senator Seeberger? Senator Seeberger, are you requesting a roll call?
I'm requesting a roll call. Thank you, Mr. President.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Any other discussion? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll on the Seeberger motion. Senator Bowden, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Herr votes aye.
Senator Hurd votes aye.
And Senator Morrison votes aye.
And Senator Morrison votes aye. Senator Jasinski, those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Barr votes aye.
Senator Barr votes aye.
And thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lang votes aye.
And Senator Lang votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 0 noes, the motion, the Seeberger motion, prevails. Any other discussion before we go to the before we give the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? Any amendments to the bill? Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, no amendment, but wondering if the author would yield for a question.
Senator Seeberger, will you yield? She will yield. Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, Senator Seeberger, can you recap for the body the dollar amounts that are in here and what those are going to go for to help the EMS across the state?
Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Westrom. I'd be happy to talk a little bit about my bill and the money that's included. This bill represents the culmination of years of work begun by senators and legislators before I even got here, including Senator Lang, who I know has worked tirelessly on this issue. My bill addresses various issues facing EMS in the state of Minnesota today. Those issues include the governance of emergency medical services within the state. It includes retention and recruitment of employees. It includes workforce shortages. It includes reimagining how we deliver pre-hospital care to those Minnesotans, both in suburban districts, urban districts, and greater Minnesota. My bill includes a pilot program for districts in greater Minnesota, which would include implementation of a sprint medic model to provide immediate ALS care to folks who need emergency medical services, and to support our volunteer and paid-on-call BLS ambulance services in greater Minnesota. This bill, this pilot program has a cost of $6 million, and that's what's included in my bill. There is also a restructuring of the governing body for EMS. We have found that the EMSRB, the Emergency Medical Services Regulatory Board, has not been effective. It has included self-dealing. It has included lack of oversight. And those were all findings made clear during the OLA audit reports that came out in 2022. The audit report strongly recommended that the governing structure of the EMS system in the state of Minnesota be restructured, and that's what we've done. So when we were out in meeting in various towns and cities throughout greater Minnesota with the EMS task force during the interim, we heard from Minnesotans what the needs were across the state. And this bill begins the process of restructuring and addressing those needs. There's also a bill for emergency aid, and Senator Hochschild's going to speak to that. It will be amended onto my bill today. That amount is $24 million, and I know that falls far short of what our agencies need, but it's something. And it's some money that we can immediately provide to our ambulance services who have the greatest need. I want to thank Senator Rasmussen for all the work he did to come up with a formula so that we can target those services that have the most need and get the money to those services that can really use it. I know it's not the $120 million that was requested, but $24 million is better than the initial $10 million, and it's better than nothing. So we're starting the process. But what I want to remind the body and Senator Westrom is that there's an underlying reason why these services are losing money. We can provide one-time emergency aid today, but what we really have to do is look at the system as a whole, and that's the work that we're beginning with my bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Westrom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Seeberger. Mr. President, I have no further questions.
Senator Hochschild.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the A1 amendment.
Senator Hochschild offers the A1 amendment. The Secretary will report the A1 amendment.
Senator Hochschild moves to amend House File Number 4738 as follows. Page 42, after line 28, insert. This is the A1 amendment.
Senator Hochschild to your A1 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members, and thank you, Senator Seeberger, for your leadership on this EMS issue and for the bill that you have brought forward. During the interim, we created the EMS task force, and I want to thank the leadership for the creation of that task force because it gave us the opportunity to bring together a bipartisan group of legislators to tour around the state of Minnesota to see the challenges that we face with EMS. In that effort, we had town halls where we brought folks in, stakeholders, community members, mayors from northeastern Minnesota, central Minnesota, southwest Minnesota, to hear about the acute challenges that we face with EMS. And what we've learned is that this is an acutely rural challenge that we face. And we also know that it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to address EMS. There's not a silver bullet to this challenge. There's not a snapping of the fingers and every problem goes away. We have to look at short-term solutions as well as mid to long-term solutions. And the work that Senator Seeberger has done, that Senator Lang has done, is helping us with that mid to long-term reforms that we need based on the AOL report that has come out about the challenges that EMS faces. What my amendment does is it addresses the short-term fire that we need to put out with EMS in our rural communities. regardless of your zip code, regardless of where someone lives, when they dial 911 for a loved one who may be suffering from a heart attack or for their own health and safety, the expectation is that an ambulance shows up. The expectation is that life-saving care is there for you regardless of where you call home. This is an equity issue for Greater Minnesota, and we need to make sure that we're supporting these services where it's needed most. If you look at all of the license for EMS across the state of Minnesota, what you find is that the revenues coming in compared to the costs are actually in the green. Let me repeat that. EMS is making money statewide if you combined all the revenue and all the costs. However, if you look at a map of where the licenses are held, you will see revenue being made in the metro and revenue being lost in Greater Minnesota. So this aid proposal that I'm bringing forward is meant to address where we are losing money for EMS services. And I want to talk very briefly about why we're losing money in Greater Minnesota. First, in Greater Minnesota, we have a higher proportion of seniors living in our communities. This means that seniors have more medical care needs than younger populations in the suburbs and the metro. They're calling for an ambulance more often. Secondly, in Greater Minnesota, the obvious thing is we have longer distances. Calling an ambulance can sometimes take 25 minutes, an hour. We've heard horror stories of even 90 minutes. So those longer distances create bigger financial challenges for our rural ambulance. In addition, because there are more seniors and those with lower incomes in Greater Minnesota, they're on Medicare and Medicaid. And Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements at the federal level are not reimbursing EMS for the costs that are truly incurred. Another challenge is that in the suburbs and in the metro, the ambulance licenses are traditionally held by a private hospital, a nonprofit that's able to make a little bit of money and invest back in their services. Unfortunately, in Greater Minnesota, because they're losing money, there's no incentive for private entities or nonprofits to take on these licenses. So once again, what does that mean? It means that our small rural towns are asking their own citizens to take on the license, use their property taxes to pay for the ambulance services. We already have low property tax bases in rural communities, and now we're compounding it with a lack of federal reimbursement, lack of state support, and asking local property tax owners who are traditionally more senior, traditionally lower income, to pay for these services. It's inequitable and it's unfair. And lastly, we face a workforce challenge and a volunteer challenge in Greater Minnesota. I'm not saying it's not a challenge in the metro or the suburbs, but we know with that aging population, once again, it's that much harder to get the workforce that we need. I want to thank Senator Rasmussen, Senator Lang, and Senator Seeberger for not only the work on the EMS task force, but also for just sitting down and having an honest, bipartisan conversation about this challenge. It's been one of the most pleasurable experiences I've had here in this body, just truly looking to address a challenge that we face, not playing politics, not making it a game, but saying, what can we do to find a solution? And Senator Rasmussen in particular worked really hard on the math when it comes to this formula and took feedback from Senator Seeberger and I on our side of the aisle to make sure that it worked for all of us. So the first thing this formula does is it attributes $24 million to rural EMS services. It will exclude multiple licenses in the metro as well as in our regional hubs. We also exclude hospital licenses in the 7-county metro. You have to have a license. You have to have had a license in 2022 and continue to carry that same license into 2024. With the formula, the first 20% is a flat payment to all eligible providers across the board. The next 40% is for PSAs with less than 30 responses per square mile. And then the last 40% goes to a point structure that makes it so that it's based on the number of responses you have in your PSA. What this is meant to do is make it so that we didn't have a cliff in the support that we were providing to our license holders, especially in our rural communities. And so you get points based on a lower number of responses, and as you go up to have a higher number of responses, you start to reduce the number of points, thus reducing the formula payment that your PSA gets. Lastly, we also are requiring a report to be done by February 15th, 2026 on what the aid was used for. So members, once again, I'm really proud of the work that the EMS task force did. I'm really proud of the great work that Senator Seeberger did on the reforms that we need to make to this troubled system. And I want to thank across the aisle Senator Lang and Senator Rasmussen for their work on the formula and the aid that we're providing our communities. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I just want to echo what's been said from my colleagues in terms of I really appreciate the opportunity to serve on the EMS task force and to hear the stories of Minnesotans across the state who are on the front lines of dealing with our emergency medical service crisis. And we know in particular the need in greater Minnesota. There is a EMS provider in the district I represent that has fewer runs in a year than some metro services have in one evening. Yet they still have to have ambulances there. They have to have people on call so that they can respond to Minnesotans who are experiencing a medical crisis, a healthcare emergency. And so I really appreciate the strong bipartisan work, the work of Senator Seeberger, Senator Hauschild, Senator Lang on putting this package together. And in particular, on this amendment for funding, we worked very long and hard to ensure that the dollars were going where they were needed most, especially given resource constraints. We needed to make sure that the services who needed this funding the most got it, and I believe that this amendment prioritizes resources for those greater Minnesota services that are struggling the most, and so I'd encourage members to vote yes on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other discussion on the A1 amendment before we move to adopt it? Senator Hauschild.
Mr. President, I just asked for a roll call, please.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. The Secretary will take the roll on the A1 amendment. Senator Bowden, those voting pursuant to Rule 40.1.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Herr votes aye.
Senator Herr votes aye.
And Senator Morrison votes aye.
And Senator Morrison votes aye. Senator Jasinski, those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Barr votes aye.
Senator Barr votes aye.
And thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lang votes aye.
And Senator Lang votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 65 ayes and 0 noes, the A1 amendment is adopted. Members, any other amendments? Seeing none, the Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
House File Number 4738, a bill for an act relating to health, establishing an Office of Emergency Medical Services to replace the Emergency Medical Services Regulatory Board.
Third reading. Any other discussion before we go to the author of the bill? Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think one other point that I wanted to make, in addition to the funding amendment that Senator Hauschild offered and worked on, is how important and sometimes thankless it was to work on the Office of the Legislative Auditor recommendations in here. And we really found in that OLA report that we had an industry that was self-regulating itself. And it was leading to a lack of oversight and a lack of planning for the crisis situation that we find ourselves in today. And so I do appreciate Senator Seeberger doing that hard work on the policy in this bill to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success in the future. In addition, there's some other common sense reforms that will help services from across the state be able to remove some unnecessary regulatory barriers to allowing firefighters to have an easier opportunity to drive ambulances in rural communities, to allow people who used to have licenses to be able to renew their licenses and get back into emergency medical services. And so I really appreciate all the work that has come out of the EMS task force, and I look forward to supporting this bill today. Our work will not be done on this topic. We will be back here next session looking at how we can not just deal with the immediate needs, but the long-term needs, and to fix this problem. But this is a good step forward that I look forward to supporting today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other discussion before we go to the author of the bill with final comments before we vote? Seeing none, Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Rasmussen is exactly correct. Our work is not done. This is just the beginning.
Senator Seeberger. Senator Nelson did ask to speak, and I inadvertently forgot her. Are you okay if she could go? Because I want to make sure that you have the last word, so accept my apologies. Senator Nelson.
Mr. President, I need not speak. My comments were already alliterated, so right to the author.
Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our work will continue when it comes to EMS, because what we've discovered and what we've known actually for quite some time is that EMS has become a social safety net. Folks are calling for an ambulance when it's not a true emergency. And this leads to increased call volume, taxing an already overtaxed system, additional folks being seen in the emergency departments when their care could be addressed further upstream. And really the vision here is to reimagine how we deliver pre-hospital care in the state of Minnesota, because the system we have right now is not sustainable. And it's not a Minnesota issue, it's a nationwide issue. So what our bill does, and I say our bill, because I couldn't have done it without the work of Senator Huntschild, Senator Lang, and Senator Rasmussen. What our bill does is it addresses various points in the system that need immediate help while we continue to work on these issues, and we'll come before this body again in future sessions with additional changes. What my bill does, what our bill does, is from the governing structure we took seriously the findings that were made in the OLA report, and we restructured the governing organization. And Mr. President, I personally took some personal pushback and hits on this, because as a paramedic working for one of the agencies here in the state of Minnesota, my bosses did not care for what I was doing, and that trickled down into my workplace. But I knew what I was doing was the right thing. And it's the right thing for EMS in the state of Minnesota. The Sprint Medic model, the innovation zones, the pilot program that we're establishing in greater Minnesota is going to provide us with valuable feedback and data with regard to how we deliver pre-hospital care in the state of Minnesota. The Sprint Medic is somebody who's in a squad ready to go. When the tones come out and a call is made, that person is in their squad, in the uniform, ready to go on their way to the call to deliver immediate ALS care, advanced life-saving care. And we know from the data that immediate ALS care improves patient outcomes. The analogy I like to use is, imagine if our police force was a volunteer paid-on-call police force, and all our police officers held day jobs. They did something else. They carried a pager with them. And when a police call came out, the pager went off, that person had to drop what they were doing, drive to the police station, put on their uniform, get in their squad, wait for their partner, and then go to the call. That's how we provide ambulance care in most of the places in Minnesota. And what the Sprint Medic model will do is have a full-time on-duty medic who can immediately go to a call, provide the care that's needed while we wait for our volunteer and paid-on-call BLS ambulance services to become staffed and start to the call. The other advantage is that if the Sprint Medic, if the paramedic gets out to the call and decides that this isn't a transport, an ambulance isn't needed, they can cancel that ambulance and free it up for another call. This 2-year program will provide us valuable data so that we can, which will inform decisions on how we restructure the delivery of pre-hospital care in the state of Minnesota, both in greater Minnesota and in urban areas. Our bill also eases staffing challenges that all services are seeing. Currently, an ambulance must be staffed by 2 EMTs, 1 person to drive and 1 person to provide patient care in the back. As we have seen in our BLS ambulance services, we don't always have 2 EMTs who are available to respond, but we do have emergency medical responders, EMRs. And our bill provides that EMRs can drive the vehicle, which they're perfectly qualified to do, while the EMT is in back with the patient. This will ease the staffing shortages and provide additional staffing that is so sorely needed by our emergency medical services throughout the state. And finally, with this one-time payment of emergency aid to our ambulance services, we are recognizing the need out there. They have been telling us for years that they are underwater, that they're losing money, that they're in danger of folding, that they can't sustain the services that they're providing. And the one thing that I took away from our meetings during the EMS task force was how hungry people were to talk about this issue. How they were so thankful that somebody was finally listening and we were finally doing something. And it has been my honor to be a part of this and to start making the changes that are so desperately needed in the system. The delivery of pre-hospital care is a nonpartisan issue. It affects everybody in this room. When you call 911 because someone you love is having a medical emergency, the last thing you want to think about is whether that ambulance is going to be staffed or whether that ambulance can be self-supporting. You just want somebody to come and help your loved one. And those of us who serve in the back of the ambulance, it is our honor and privilege to do that. That's why we do it. And everybody in the state of Minnesota deserves the same high-quality level of pre-hospital care, regardless of where you live, regardless of where the closest hospital is, and regardless whether you're in a red district or a blue district. This is a nonpartisan issue. I'm grateful for the bipartisan nature of this bill, for the ability for us to cooperate and reach across the aisle and work together to make these necessary changes. And quite frankly, Mr. President, I wish we had more bills like this, because I think there are many, many issues where across the aisle we can have agreement. And I would urge my colleagues to do the same, to work together across the aisle the way Senator Hanschild and I were able to do, the way Senator Rasmussen, Senator Lang. It's not rocket science, it can be done. So thank you, members, for hearing this bill. I would urge a green vote, and I look forward to being back here in future sessions doing additional good work for the field of EMS. Thank you, Mr. President.
The Secretary will take the roll for final passage on House File 4738. Members, please vote. Senator Bowden, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Herr votes aye.
Senator Herr votes aye.
And Senator Morrison votes aye.
Senator Morrison votes aye. Senator Jasinski, those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Barr votes aye.
Senator Barr votes aye.
And thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lang votes aye.
Senator Lang votes aye. Senator Pratt, are you voting? All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 0 noes, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members remaining, we will go to the next bill on special orders. That would be House File 5363. Senator Mann. Oh, Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to move a recess to the call of the president. And DFL members, we will caucus upstairs.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the majority leader yield for one question?
Will you yield, Senator Murphy? She will yield. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Murphy, I understand we've got a number of conference committee reports and at least one other special order coming up. Could you give us just a little bit of a time frame for this recess and what the day kind of looks like going forward?
Senator Murphy, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I don't expect this to be a long recess, but we would like a moment. And we do have a lot of work to do, and I expect that we will spend the day doing that work.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Republicans will caucus at 3:24 once recess is called.
On the Murphy motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The Senate is now in recess.